Aloha and welcome to Farm Life Nation, a place for conversations about the problems we face and the solutions that exist today. Well, aloha everyone and welcome to Farm Life Nation. This is episode number 5 and I'm super excited to have our next guest with us here today. This lovely gentleman is without a doubt one of the first people that I ever met that knew more about cannabis than me, one of my favorite plants. So we're going to talk about that lovely weed that so many people now embrace in their life, but was once considered evil and not allowed in the household because of all the dangerous things it could do to your children. So we're really here to set the record straight. And I'm super excited to introduce my dear friend, Todd Dalotto, who's the president of Can Research and is a cannabis horticultural scientist. And Todd, you know more about this beautiful plant than most people that I know. So I would love for you to really share with everybody, when did you first find this magical plant?
Well, happy to be with you here, Raven. Yeah, cannabis has been kind of a lifelong interest of mine. Definitely as an early teenager, giving it a try and also trying to grow it, from seeds in a bag, in neighboring woods around my house and different situations. So I was definitely on a quest to learn how to grow it, and so when I started getting into it professionally, I was around 23 years old in Eugene, Oregon. And Eugene, by the way, is a real place to really do good activism and business activism in a really supportive community. So that's where I started Hungry Bear Hemp Foods, the US's first hemp food business. And I got into I wanted to get into the cannabis business because I saw cannabis as the crop that has the greatest potential to enhance personal and planetary health. And so, just like many other hippies with no business experience, I started a business. And I was really into food and nutrition and food crafting at the time. And I was also an environmental activist. And so I kind of put my environmental activism and food crafting skills together and started Hungry Bear Hemp Foods. Figured, one of the best ways of turning people on to cannabis and cannabis nutrition was to get it inside their bodies. And
that's when we met. Yeah. We met around that time when you were doing Hungry Bear Hemp Foods, and it was really difficult to get raw hemp seed at the time. I mean, let's kind of back up a little bit, because there's some little kittens that are going to watch this that may not really understand that cannabis has only been liberated in the last decade in our lifetime. When we were kids and when cannabis was around, it was hard to get. It was not necessarily the best quality. And I'm just like imagining you as a teenager with these seeds, and just like people would deem that as being a criminal back when we were young. So let's back up a little bit and then we'll go into the nutrition part, because I love the Hungry Bear Hemp Foods piece and I definitely want to touch on that. But if you could share a little bit with those who may not know, where were we, 100 years ago with cannabis, and what has happened up until where we are today?
Yeah, well, 100 years ago, we depended on cannabis as a very significant source of fiber, bird seed, fuel. And it was a thriving industry. You got all the stories about our founding fathers growing hemp and Martha Washington making the first American flag, all of these patriotic stories, but it really was an important industry. But a lot of things were happening at the turn of the century, and so automobiles were becoming the more standard method of transportation. And so naturally the growing interest of the fossil fuel industry and the steel industry. Also changes were happening in pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals were moving from a plant-based medicine to isolated single molecule compounds, that are the drugs we know today. There was also changes in healthcare, also moving away from natural into into more Western medicine type. And there was also a lot of cultural changes. There was a rise of jazz music and African American, Afro-Cuban, Latino influences were very positively influencing our culture, and transforming them with music and art and food. And cannabis played a very central role in a lot of the culture of African Americans and former slaves and Latinos and Mexicanos. And so all of these industrial and cultural aspects were kind of coming to a point where actually the inventing of the cotton gin was also played a big part. So the cotton gin not only gave a new industry an enemy. They wanted to trash hemp so that they could use the cotton gin to have this new textile revolution. It also meant the increasing growing of cotton, which meant more slave labor, post-slavery slave labor type of agricultural farm worker injustice and massive increase of pesticides, as well as the rest of the green revolution of increasing our crop output by increasing pesticide use and fertilizer use and monocropping. Okay, so all of these changes I'm mentioning, cannabis was was the biggest enemy of them all. So I'm not much of a conspiracy person, but the history will prove that it was really a conspiracy between the iron, steel, auto, fossil fuel, cotton, pesticide, as well as the cultural transformations of wanting to put African Americans and Mexicans in a position of arrest and deportation and jailing, and that was part of the Harry Anslinger smear campaign. Okay, so you have Harry Anslinger, who's the biggest newspaper Mongol in the country, who's also linked to the paper fiber industry, which hemp makes amazing paper. So not only is he a consumer of the paper, he wants to move towards the timber industry out of hemp, but he also has the power to spread all kinds of propaganda through his newspapers across the country. So this is kind of the perfect formula of a massive propaganda and political smearing campaign against hemp. So by 1937, hemp was federally illegal, and becoming illegal in most every state.
Wow.
Well,
I want to pause you for a second,
sure.
because I actually want to make a comment about this, because here we have this plant that everybody used for everything. It was understood that it was great for food, for fuel, for fiber, and for medicine. And our founding fathers potentially wrote the Constitution of the United States on hemp. Martha Washington potentially sews the first American flag out of hemp. We have hemp for victory, which basically is hemp is being used to create sails and ropes and rigging and the shoelaces and the stitching on soldiers' boots. So we go from that to this plant is going to kill your children. It's going to create all this psychoses. It's bad, bad, bad. Make it go away so that we can further our industries in timber, coal, oil, cotton, all these things that hemp could have potentially replaced. Without a doubt, we know that we can produce all of these amazing solutions from hemp, which is good for the earth, good for the soil, good for the people, but that stopped. And there's a very dramatic stop at that point. And I remember when I first heard about the American flag potentially being made out of hemp, and I was like, I was in high school at the time, and I was like, why is this not in my history book? Sitting there in US history, not a single mention of industrial hemp in America, studying the United States. And that to me was a big eye opener. And that was before you and I met, to where I started going down this rabbit hole of going, okay, well, what happened? And what is this plant actually used for? And it seems like it wants to work with us. It seems like it's a plant that wants to actually help humanity by solving all these solutions that we've, of course, created for ourselves. So that leading into nutrition, which is the next point in our conversation, is what blew my mind was that not only was cannabis, medicinally beneficial in a lot of ways, depending upon your extracts or how you're utilizing it, but then hemp and hemp's extracts and how that was not even really starting to dive into the science of it until I would say within the last, couple of decades of what CBD can do for the human body. But when we met, you were really focusing on the nutritional aspect of it. And do you think that you went the nutritional route because as soon as people knew it was safe to consume and they were getting the health benefits, that maybe they might open their minds up to the potential of what this plant could create?
Yeah, so so the modern hemp movement started kind of in the 80s when Jack Herrera wrote The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and he started going around the country speaking about it. And so by the early mid 90s, there had been a real movement that was building. And like I said, hippies were starting their first businesses. And so I was looking at what industry was starting. You have everything from people making hemp bracelets, to, the textiles. It was kind of the quality of fiber was pretty poor at the time. So I look back at that era as the potato sack look.
Yeah, totally.
And we've moved so far beyond that, but there was no one doing hemp foods at the time. And so it was kind of just my natural thing. And getting hemp, there was no one else getting hemp into people's bodies. And so, yeah, looking at it nutritionally, it's the best source for protein, easily digestible, complete, more than 8 essential amino acids. The essential fatty acid profile was amazing. Omega-3s, omega-6s, and gamma-linolenic acid. And dietary fiber, and it's just the ideal macronutrient that you could mix with your whatever micronutrient routine you got. But you've and so at the time, so the US has this stupid law that says any hemp seed in this country at the time must be incapable of germination. And so that meant, of course, you couldn't grow it in the US, you had to import it. And in order to import it, the main way they made it incapable of germination was through seed sterilization, which is high temperature, high heat, and it reduces the flavor, shelf life, and nutritional value of the seed. But we had nothing else to work with. So our first batches, we were importing hemp seed from China.
China came first before Canada?
Oh yeah, way before.
Okay.
China's never stopped growing it. They saw the economic and benefits of it, and so yeah, China always has never stopped growing it. And so we imported it from China. We got it into the country as a bird seed. in importation category. And of course,
fertile bird seed, right?
no, it had to be incapable of
Oh, it was still
germination.
incapable.
So it was
Okay, so they
still,
were pasteurizing it.
so then soon after that, you can only stand for that so long.
Right.
And so some colleagues of mine, we schemed together, Eric Forster at Safari Seeds and Paul Galen from Santa Cruz. We started, Safari Seeds went and sourced seed from China, good quality organic seed, shipped it to Santiago, Chile, which doesn't have these steam sterilization laws. We pressed it for oil in olive oil presses in Santiago, and then shipped the oil and hemp seed cake to the US from Chile. And of course, since it was pressed for oil, it's incapable of germination. So we were able to offer the US the first cold pressed organic non-sterilized hemp seed oil, and it tasted amazing and it felt amazing. And then it was just a couple years later that Canada did their first hemp crop. And so I went up there with your ex-husband, and we celebrated.
I still have those pictures, by the way.
Yeah, and we still have the well, anyway, we still have the pictures. So we witnessed the first hemp seed harvest up in
that was a big deal. That was like a really big deal. I remember being concerned, like, is there going to be an issue with you guys going across the border? Like, are they going to let you come back? I mean, it was a big deal to be a cannabis advocate in those days. Like, we were really crossing the line of being potentially considered, an outlaw with how the laws were based. And to see where we were then to where we've come just in the last, like, let's say 10 years recently, so much has changed. And you've gone from someone who was doing everything they could to source the pure nutrition of cannabis, to educate people, to now being an incredible high-level scientist, really preserving genetics, having your own farms, and you've done some amazing things with cannabis in Oregon. And I'm wearing my Portland shirt today, just for everybody. So we're rocking Oregon today. So tell us a little bit about where you are now and what you've been able to achieve since those first days of not knowing if you were going to make it home from the Canadian border.
Yeah. So the days of Hungry Bear Hemp Foods really was, I mean, when we call it a war on drugs, it really was a war. My business was raided, with an AR-15 in my crotch, and not, of course, I dropped the charge because I was just doing hemp. My farm was raided, armed and theft, and so we were really living in a state of fear. And it was really only the fearless who went out and to do hemp businesses, or to do medical cannabis. And so through all of this, I helped. I wrote the world's first hemp cookbook. I founded Oregon's first education support and medical services center, the Compassion Center. And I helped, I served on the advisory committee of medical marijuana to help guide the state Oregon Health Authority through rulemaking and managing our new medical marijuana program. And then adult use came along. And then when adult use came along, the whole Oregon scene got so freaking crowded because Oregon is just full of amazing cannabis enthusiasts, talented growers, and it's just so full of cannabis culture that the market was so over flooded. And I helped some of these businesses get licensed and consult for them and design their production facilities. But the crowded space really pushed me to go international, where there's some breathing space, where there's going to be expansion of legalization and industrialization globally, for the next 20, 30 more years. And so I was hired by a company called Organto that was in the organic food business, who was looking to expand into cannabis. I did some consulting work, and they made me the president of their global cannabis division. And then that company turned into Zebra Brands, a company I helped co-found with the Organo folks. And I was president of Zebra Brands, starting in 2019. And the first thing we did was become licensed in Colombia. Colombia is one of the first three countries to legalize nationally, behind Uruguay and Canada eventually. And so we became fully licensed. I built a breeding program there, because Colombia, it's on the equator, on both sides of the equator. And so we were crossing my breeding work that I developed in the Pacific Northwest over 20 years, and crossed it with their land races on the tropics, and adapted cultivars to have the Pacific Northwest quality of dank buds with the environmental adaptation and photoperiodicity of the tropics and the equator.
Amazing.
And so we've got an amazing breeding program right there. We're actually now turning the company back over to the people we bought it from, and so they could continue it. We also went to the Netherlands, and we're working to get to compete for one of the top 2 licenses for medical production in the Netherlands.
Cool.
And this summer we launched beverages, cannabis infused beverages in Canada. So THC infused, CBN, CBD, and so those are one of the top sellers right now. Just a new brand in Canada. Vicious Citrus and Neo is coming on soon. So we got exciting beverages, and our company, we have a few subsidiaries in Mexico, and that's been the focus of my attention lately, because we were granted an amparo, a Supreme Court injunction from the Mexican Supreme Court that basically gave our company the right to commercially grow, manufacture, distribute, import, export low THC cannabis. And so we're the only company that's allowed to do that right now. And so we're the only company with the constitutional right. And so many companies are following by copying our lawsuit and filing it themselves. And so we're awaiting an authorization from COFEPRIS, the Mexican FDA, before we could put seeds in the ground. But we're doing that right now, and so we're awaiting that authorization any day. So we're going to be planting the first commercial hemp crops in Mexico since they chased the Spanish out, a couple hundred years ago. So that's a really exciting thing we're doing, and that's kind of how in Mexico things are changing, because they did the same thing with the amparos with adult use and with medicinal use. And when the Supreme Court receives 3 of the same amparos that are granted, the first 3 they grant the plaintiff, the exclusive right. And then after the 3rd, then they direct the legislature to say, okay, you need to change the laws, to make this for everybody. And so they did that with adult use cannabis and medicinal cannabis a few years ago. But the legislature has been dragging their heels, finding a way to keep, delaying it. And the president, AMLO, he's very opposed to marijuana. So we might have to wait for another president regime change in Mexico in order to see some progress on the adult use and medicinal front. but they don't have the same problems with CBD and low THC cannabis. So we're moving forward much, much faster than they did with adult use in medical. But Mexico and the rest of Latin America, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Chile, they are all, the cannabis culture is very strong in Latin America. And it's very strong. I was doing some work with indigenous communities in Colombia. We did ceremonies with the Taboo, who's a nomadic tribe in the Amazon, who believe cannabis originated in the Amazon. And so archaeologically they probably aren't correct, but they believe they gave the cannabis to the sadhus in India and brought it to the east that way. And we worked with the Kojis, are one of the few indigenous tribes in Colombia that survived the Spanish, and they did so by going up into the high elevations of the Sierra Nevadas de Santa Marta in northern Colombia, which, if you've ever heard of Santa Marta gold, that's one of the world famous cultivars, landrace cultivars that came out of Colombia. And so the Marambira, the cartel marijuana in the 70s took over most of the Kogi indigenous land. And so I have colleagues that are working with the Kogis on business projects like coffee cultivation and cáñamo, cannabis growing, to help return the equity, the business equity, back to the Kogis in the form of returning their indigenous land back to them.
Wow.
Through cannabis. They lost it from the cannabis cartels in the 70s, and now they're getting it back by cannabis legalization. And so that's really how cannabis legalization came about in Colombia. We all know how bloody the drug wars have been in Colombia, and it's been terrible. They're the most kindest people on the planet, practically, but the country has dealt with so much bloodshed because of the white powder mostly. And so part of the 2016 bill, which was basically a peace treaty between the cartels and Colombia, cannabis legalization was a big part of that, to give kind of the family farmers that grew for the cartels an opportunity to have a piece of the pie, to have economic opportunities. And that's really what cannabis is all about, whether it's farming, diet, clothing, culture, legislation, law, it's all about healing the planet. And so the Colombia story is an amazing project, and I'm working on I'm producing a documentary series right now to highlight the changes that are occurring in countries like Colombia. And we're going to go to every country or region and tell the story about how cannabis legalization has transformed their culture, their politics, their criminal justice, economy, the whole works. And Colombia is going to be our first story, and it's a beautiful story to tell.
Wow. I mean, that's just absolutely incredible, Todd, what you've been able to accomplish in your career. And you truly are a beacon of light for so many people, and a true example of what it means to dedicate your life to a topic, and to see how far the seed has spread, compared to the days when, even having seeds you could be arrested for having a little baggie of cannabis seeds, to where we are now and what you're able to do for these indigenous cultures and for these countries, and to really liberate this plant. I mean, huge kudos to you. I hope everybody listening got really a lot out of today's podcast, and you have so much knowledge to share. And I know that you do offer consulting. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, had some specific questions, either about a project that they're working on or a region that they'd like to open or producing their own cultivars, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Sure, just go to my website. It's www.canresearch.net. And there you'll find out all about my consulting services, and I also have online cannabis horticultural science course, and other videos, including one produced by your host there, and lots of free stuff too. So yeah, love to get in touch with people, and I'm always excited to do new things with this plant around the world. So yeah.
Amazing. So excited. It just makes my heart so happy. I've always had the dream of being able to see the Hawaiian Islands be regenerated through hemp cultivation. And I mean, it takes a little bit longer in this state to get things done than over in Oregon, unfortunately, but it is what it is. So I am thrilled to have you here with us. I'd love to have you back as things continue, and can't wait to share about this documentary that you're working on. Can't wait to see it myself. It sounds like an incredible project. So thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day to come and jump on Farm Life Nation with us. I hope everybody had a great time listening and learning more about what Todd's up to over at Can Research. Again, if you want to learn more, go to canresearch.net. Contact my friend Todd Dalotto. He's here to support you if you have specific questions or needs or dreams that you want to see manifest as well. And thanks so much, Todd, for fighting the good fight, my brother, and keeping the seeds growing. Thanks for being here with us today.
Sure, happy to join you there, Raven. Until next time.
If you too would like to be on the show or would like to become a sponsor of Farm Life Nation, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear what you're growing up to. Now let's just take a moment and hear from our sponsors. Hey everybody, aloha. Thanks so much for tuning into Farm Life Nation. If you are interested in getting your hands on some certified organic hemp seed oil infused with CBD, we've got a gift code for you. Just go to puriumcbd.com and enter the referral code SHIFTRX to save $50 off your first 1,500 milligram bottle.